Good evening. This is the Comprehensive Financial Advisory Committee Operating Budget Subcommittee meeting. Today is April 7th, 2025. Welcome. Uh, is there anybody here recording our meeting? Please make yourself known to us. This is our subcommittee composed of Tom Keene, Chris King, Chris Lauzon, myself, Lillian Wu, and our staff, Town Finance Director Mark Mill. The first item on the agenda is to approve the minutes of March 19th, April 9th, and April 23rd. We can look at them individually, or we can make a motion to approve all three at the same time.
I would move to approve all three.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to approve all three sets of minutes. Is there any discussion, changes? I noticed that the committee members, Tom Keene's name is not spelled correctly, so we can just make that change.
Oh, I just recently changed it. That's funny.
So you can be incognito, just in case. They're very well done, Mark. Are there any other?
You're on mute.
I created those using the AI companion feature in Zoom.
Oh.
Sometimes it doesn't pick up the correct spelling of an
That's okay.
individual's name. I thought I caught them all, but
Yeah,
apparently
that's all right.
I'll fix that, Tom.
All right.
Right.
Not hearing any changes. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right. Moving right along then, we continue our review of the drafts of the various sections of the operating budget. We have done the front matter and the revenue and general fund, and we've done the school department. So those are essentially completed. So we can start tonight with the enterprise fund draft that Chris King has.
So how would you like to go through this? We can, I did get input or some edits that from Lillian and Tom. I just got some edits from you also prior to the meeting. Lillian, I've been able to incorporate your edits into a new rev.
Okay.
Tom, I haven't been able to do that yet, but I did look at all the edits that you had provided, and they're all fabulous edits. I do appreciate you really digging through and making not only some edits, but some style changes that make the report look very nice. So I do appreciate that, and I will incorporate those in. So other than the edits, how would you like to proceed? Would you like to go through each page and talk about each page, or maybe make comments of the content of each page?
Obviously I gave all my thoughts and my edits. So I really wouldn't have anything to add as we went through page by page. I guess the only larger question I have, Chris, is there a big conclusion here about the enterprise funds? Like, are we pleased with the way they're going on? Are we pleased do we feel it's appropriate that all of them except for the youth commission are self-sustaining? Do we see that going forward? I mean, kind of big conclusions, but that would be the only place I would go to on this.
Yeah, and I think maybe I don't know the history of the town well enough to be able to say HYCC has been grandfathered in to be a loser. However, as my only statements would be HYCC is such an important function for the town to be a getter or a location where the community comes together and has activity as a community. That is important for a community to become a community. So that would be my only statement that I would make is, at the end is, if I look at the enterprise funds, there are two funds that are what I would call unable to sustain themselves in the long term, and that would be HYCC and PEG, the community television station. And
Right.
and it's HYCC for sure, but it has a good purpose, and I can state that in a little bit more of a final statement. Regarding the television station, it's really unknown. I know, Tom, you said you've cut the cord and you're doing everything on YouTube.
Right.
Not everybody has cut the cord, and so it's unknown. And I know, Mark, you and I talked about this. It's unknown if the trend is still a downward trend, or if there's enough of us individuals that have not cut the cord to still be able to see a revenue from a cable TV license. So, it's a balance.
And it's a good point. And knowing that Comcast's business model will likely include further increases in charges for the internet, which is becoming a bigger and bigger portion of their revenue stream. And since our licensing agreement is based on their gross revenues, increases in their internet charges could end up being increased revenue streams for the town of Barnstable. And so, like you said, it remains to be seen, but with a very healthy reserve balance of $3.7 million and an annual operating budget, of less than $1 million a year, or just about 1.1 million is this year. They have substantial reserves to cover any shortfall in a current year that may be necessary for a number of years.
And Tom, I'm sorry, Tom.
My question was simply going to be, is this a valuable activity? How many people actually watch it? How critical is it to communication with townspeople? And my point to you, Chris, in part was, yeah, I'm a cord cutter, but also there's so many ways that we can get information. Do we really need to have this?
It's a good argument, and it's an argument that can be floated to the town board. Personally, I think that having information pushed to the community rather than pulled from the community is a better way of communicating, because you can end up with a small number of people that are active and aware, and a large number of people that are inactive and unaware. And so PEG just becomes another avenue. Now the question is the cost really beneficial? Right. I don't see PEG as being even though the number has gone down, it's not losing a ton of money. And I think that's part of what Mark was saying. It's not losing a lot of money. It's in the tens of thousands per year, but there's millions of dollars that are sitting, waiting to be spent. So it can be spent. Your question would be, can I take those millions of dollars and apply them somewhere else?
Exactly.
Okay. And I get that.
The licensing agreement prohibits the town from using any of the revenue stream from Comcast for anything other than public educational and government access channel broadcasting. So there are restrictions. That's really all we can use this licensing revenue for. We couldn't use it for other things.
Well, I guess,
Unless you shut the whole thing down and then that revenue is there naked. It doesn't apply to the contract anymore. Isn't that correct?
Yeah, that's a good point. I don't know. That's something we've never really talked about. But you know, we have to have an internet and cable provider in town.
Yeah.
So we wouldn't shut Comcast down. We give them the rights to our airways through this contract, and they pay us for those rights. And but the payment that they make to us for those rights are restricted under the licensing agreement. We can't change that. And then our next renewal is 2029, I believe.
Right.
And
You know, the world could be
Changing it
different then. Yeah, it could be a
And-
different world, like we were talking, Chris.
it will be a different world.
Yeah.
5G. Yeah, 5G will be, you know, Verizon and you know, cableless internet access is a real thing now, where you know you access the internet via cell towers as opposed to a cable coming into your
Right.
house.
Right. And what I meant, Mark, was shutting PEG down, not shutting Comcast down.
Yeah.
But-
Okay. Yeah.
But
I
if you
don't know
shut,
we can
if
do
you
that.
shut, yeah, if you, I mean, there's a lot that is used in terms of meetings over PEG, right? So,
Yeah, there is a lot of meetings broadcast through the public access channel. You know, the one that the town council meetings are on, as well as a lot of our boards and committees. And that would be a violation, I believe, of the licensing agreement if we did shut it down.
okay. Okay. Tom, I did try to say at the end in my comments, I did try to say that the CWMP is such a large, I don't want to call it burden, but it's a large,
Burden's a good word.
yeah.
commitment.
Thank you. It's a large commitment that the town has taken on.
Yeah.
And that large commitment might and could limit the amount of other commitments that we could take on as a town. And you know, I circumvented trying to say that the CWMP commitments are so large that it limits our ability to go for more bonds to support a school, so to speak. All right, and I didn't really say that specifically. I was just saying it obliquely by saying that the CWMP, even though that isn't really an enterprise fund, eventually that will be a part of an enterprise fund, all of the pipes and pumps.
The sewer is an enterprise fund.
The sewer is the enterprise fund,
Yes.
but the major construction project as part of that is being funded in addition to what the enterprise fund can afford.
Yeah.
And so then that question would be is, could you does that large commitment make it difficult for us to make commitments elsewhere? That's all I was trying to say.
Yeah.
And I said that at the end. I don't know if it made sense to anybody.
It made sense, and I think you're completely right on that.
Okay. So
Well, I noticed that in your report you have instituted a first, and that is at the end of almost every enterprise fund, you talk about the capital improvement projects, which we have not done before because we have limited ourselves just to the operating budgets of the enterprise funds. So I guess the question is whether we want to add this or whether we want to limit ourselves just to the enterprise fund operating.
Right, because we do have folks who are working on the capital
Yeah,
side.
because the CIP report covered all of these capital projects.
Let me take a look at that. I have to look at it to be able to follow, and I apologize.
For example, at the end of the airport, you said the airport CIP projects total $576,500.
Okay.
And then you go to the clubhouse of golf, and then you have HYCC capital projects, and then you talk about the marina new bulkhead, and then you have a capital expense for Sandy Neck. So I'm just asking whether you all want to do that, because it would be a new insertion on this particular report.
Yeah, I'm just trying to think, why did I do that is because the reason I included the capital onto each enterprise is because the enterprise is responsible for taking care of its own capital. And so for the most part, it might, if it can't meet its own capital, it might pull from reserves, or in a couple of instances like HYCC, or I think there's one other that gets $30,000. I can't remember. Maybe it's the marina gets $30,000. Those two enterprises get money from the general fund.
Well, they take out they get reserves, grants, loans. Occasionally they'll have a bond issue. And so I'm wondering whether all of this has already been covered within the CIP report. It's just a question.
Yeah. No, good question. And I'm just trying, the reason why I brought it up is because of the responsibility that the enterprise funds have towards their own capital improvements. And I could remove that. It's no problem removing that if it is duplicate effort, duplicate statement.
Unless you're trying to highlight the fact that, a lot of the enterprise funds capital improvements are financed with loans that are taken out, and those loan payments have future operating budget impacts, because we have to make sure we include those new loans in future operating budgets. So, if that's the point you're trying to make, it may be, a good reason to keep that type of information in your report.
I didn't look at it from a loan standpoint, because it was one of those, I didn't know what I didn't know. And so I wasn't looking at it from a standpoint of that each of the enterprises are taking on more obligations for their capital improvements. And so those obligations would have to be handled by the enterprise, which could cause some concern, to make sure that the enterprise has the appropriate finances and the appropriate management to be able to handle that increase. But if that's already covered if the responsibility of the enterprise covering the capital improvement is already covered in the capital improvement plan, with the separation of the capital improvement budget, separating each of the enterprises from the municipal capital improvements, then I could remove it and simplify the presentation. I'm good either way. I don't really have a hard story to say that the capital improvements are funded by and supported by by each enterprise, and they're doing a good job of it from what I can see.
Maybe it would make sense, Chris, is just have you take a look at the CIP report and kind of coordinate what you're writing with that. and just see
Yeah.
if what you're doing is, what my concern is, it might be duplicative.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I'll do that. I can look at the CIP report and make
Yeah.
sure that I'm not duplicating what
Yeah.
has already been said and already been presented.
I appreciate that, but I'm also very impressed that you took care of all of the details.
Yeah, no, it's the first time going through the enterprise, so yeah, I
Yeah.
was trying to look at all the different angles. I'm thoroughly impressed with how the enterprise, uh, um, each enterprise fund works, and thoroughly impressed by how they are managing their own businesses. And for the most part, as we said, there's really only two that are unable to maintain growth because of their reduced revenue or revenues not keeping up with their expenses.
Well, as you pointed out, the HYCC is an integral part of the community and provides so much, a wonderful venue for a lot of activities. And we probably give them about $1.5 million a year, but it increases the quality of life in the town. And so we've never really held HYCC accountable because we feel that it's a very good investment.
And I don't know how you could do it except to charge kids more, and then you'd really start to cut a lot of people.
Yeah, then you might lose some of the participation.
Right.
Yeah, that's the case, yeah.
And I don't know if it does. Typically in hockey, you have tournaments, and tournaments bring people in from outside of Hyannis that have to stay in the hotels, have to eat in the restaurants, and
Exactly.
typically those are 2 or 3 day tournaments, usually over the weekend. And I think that HYCC brings value to the economy that we might not be collecting just yet, not realizing.
Well, there's always a ripple effect because the HYCC hosts a lot of activities
Right.
that draw out of town people. So
Yeah, and to Chris's point, I mean, some in the past have stated that it's justifiable to give the HYCC a general fund subsidy because of the local economic impact it has on meals and rooms taxes, for example. And so why shouldn't we direct some of the general fund revenue over to that enterprise fund as a result of the economic, positive economic impact that they have on the community?
Yeah, especially in the off season.
yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, I think it's a thorough report. You go through each of the enterprise funds very carefully, and so anybody reading it gets an idea of what's happening, what their expenses and revenues are, and their value to the town. So it's good. What portion of this do you want to? You say we're going to talk about the CWMP in the looking ahead section. So why don't you draft that?
I will. I'll do
Okay.
that, and I'll see if there's any need to add any more to the CWMP. Was it, the way that I looked at the CWMP at portion of the sewer is that and again, this was good guidance, Mark, that you had given me is for fiscal year 26, fiscal year 26, 2026, Tom, is fiscal year 26 is already in the book, so to speak. It's already been planned. The loans are there. The where the cash is going to come from is there. The bonds are there. So there's not a lot to talk about for forward expenses on the enterprise fund portion. It's really something to talk about from a total overview portion to say, what is the commitment that we're making as a community, and how does that affect the overall financial operating budget
Yeah.
for now as well as over the next few years. So I'll go through, I'll absolutely go through each of the capital improvement plan portions and try to review that against the capital improvement plan that was presented and see how much really needs to be in this report, if
Okay.
anything, and I'll make that adjustment.
Yeah.
I have Tom's inputs that have not been incorporated into the new version yet. Lillian, your inputs have already been done. So I will make all of those changes and float a new version
Yeah.
over either, try to get it done prior to the weekend.
Okay.
I have also responsibility for the fixed cost portion. That is just finishing that one up right now. I'm about 85% done. I'm finishing up with the final analysis and comments. I have half of the analysis done and some comments. I should have a final report prior to edits to show to the team. I'm thinking tomorrow night, maybe Friday. Depends on how my work day goes.
Okay. Thank you
It's,
very much. We look forward to it.
yeah, that was a fun report also. That was a pretty interesting.
Making fabulous edits.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Now our funding model speaks to our ability to pay the debt service, correct? I mean, it pays for the funding of the CWMP process. So it comes under sewer by and large. I just want to,
Yeah, think of it as a program within the sewer enterprise fund, because it's
yeah,
part of the sewer
exactly.
enterprise fund because it's an expansion of the collection, treatment, and disposal of wastewater, and it's a sub program within that enterprise fund that has its own unique funding source.
Yeah,
It's not on user rates. We can't expand our sewer system on the current users in that utility. It has to be, future users and other resources.
right.
And those other resources include a general fund commitment. So here's an enterprise fund that's receiving a substantial
Oh, yeah,
general fund subsidy now. You've
yeah,
seen the rate model. We've built in up to 5.75 million annually from the general fund to provide the resources necessary to pay all these loans that are going to be added to that operating budget in the future once they get issued. So, that's I think, Tom, you were mentioning this earlier, is that the best use of general fund tax dollars, or should we be directing it more towards school projects or towards operations elsewhere? But, currently we've been directing substantial general fund tax dollars to the expansion of the public sewer system, along with other resources that could have been general fund monies, meals taxes, rooms taxes on short-term rentals. We've created, this special revenue fund to credit all those resources so that we can direct them towards this program as well. That all could have been general fund revenue, which is what a lot of communities did. They directed that towards their general fund operations. So, we've tried to create these resources and dedicate resources to stay within Proposition 2.5, because that's been our directive. We haven't been, received any direction to seek out, override votes campaign to fund the expansion of this program. Perhaps maybe that's something the committee wants to highlight or think about, giving the town council something to contemplate whether or not, this is a good direction that we should be going in, or maybe we should start thinking about doing something else so that we don't harm other capital, like school capital, DPW capital, and other areas, operating budgets, and so forth, because we're not going to be able to continue to do many more expansion projects unless we find more resources. And the model shows you that. If you start adding in the 27 capital program, the 28 capital program, the 29 capital program, we quickly run into deficits, and we have to find other additional funding resources to keep that expansion program going.
Yeah.
And
I think
my understanding
I-
is that we kind of have to do the sewer program, right? I mean,
Right.
the town
And
does
we're not
not,
under any regulatory order or court judgment or anything like that yet, but
but we'll be sued if we don't.
we will be sued, or we could receive, some kind of consent order from the Department of Environmental Protection to do it. They haven't done so yet because we've created the CWMP. They approved our CWMP, and we've been faithfully implementing it.
Right.
And so they haven't given us a consent order or requirement yet. But if we stop doing that, they probably will.
Yep.
How was the revenue increase with the connection increase that we see from each of the expansions of the sewers? Because I know we can't expect that the new connections will cover the entire sewer, but there is still a revenue increase because
There's going to be additional utility rate revenue that gets generated from those new customers. And so in the model, we made an assumption, and you can change that assumption in the model.
Okay.
That half of the new revenue generated from utility rates from new customers will be directed towards the expansion of the program, and the other half will be directed towards the existing collection, treatment, and disposal of the sewer utility, because we got more flow going into that system. I think you made the point in your report that more sludge is going to get produced. We have to get rid of that sludge. So there's going to be operating budget impacts as a result of more customers coming online. And so we split that new revenue 50-50 between the existing operations of the water pollution control facility and the expansion of the program, under the idea that the new user utility rate revenue, some of that revenue should contribute towards paying the debt service associated with the expansion of the program.
Right. Does that put an unfair burden on the wastewater treatment, that their costs are not covered because they've added people that they've added individuals that half of the revenue that comes in because of that connection is going to go towards paying down debt?
Well, I think that 50-50 cost share is enough to cover the additional operating costs associated with treatment, collection and treatment of the wastewater. So the other half can be directed towards the debt service of the expansion of the program, because there will be, dollar for dollar. I don't think every let's say one residential customer generates an additional $500 a year in sewer utility rate revenue. That's not going to result in another $500 of operating costs to the enterprise treatment and collection and disposal system. And so we made the assumption that it's about a 50-50 cost share, so that the utility rates aren't overly impacted, and then we do have some additional revenue that we can direct towards the expansion of the program.
Okay.
So both programs benefit, so to speak, from that.
Okay. Well, Thank you. I didn't mean to dig into it. I'm just being nerdy and asking a bunch of questions.
But it's, you know what? It's so important, Chris, that people understand
It really
that.
is, yeah.
Because it's a big assumption. It's a lot of revenue when you look at the model. Utility rate revenue is going to grow, and when we add thousands of new customers to the system, with the average residential bill being close to $500 a year, you know, that's hundreds of thousands of dollars on an annual basis. And you know, we got to make sure that it gets directed in a fair and equitable way towards the expansion of the system as well as the existing system.
Yep, understood. And it's a commitment that individuals that have septics, and I mean, for example, I'm on COM Water, which, you know, I've never paid less for water than when I got into COM Water. I mean, it's very, very inexpensive. And then having a septic, and then thinking about a connection charge and a connection rate, it'll change utility costs for me. I mean, personally, I don't, you know, that's going to be 10, 15 years down the road, but it will change. So,
But just think about it this way, you won't need to upgrade your Title V.
no,
So it kind
no, and we'll have clean water. So,
that's right.
there's a lot of benefits to that. Okay, thank you for the
Thank you, Chris.
comments. Thank you for the input. I'll make those changes.
Thank you. And you'll send us a draft of the fix whenever you get around to it.
Yeah, that'll be very soon.
Okay.
It's very close to be. I just got tired of looking at it, so I had to put
Okay.
it away.
Well, Chris Lozon sent us drafts of his DPW and police. I don't know if have you had a chance to look at it?
I did, and I sent him back comments as well.
Yeah, I think he did a super job on it. He's done this. This is his third year of doing it, so he's gotten it down pretty pat.
Yeah, just a reminder for everybody, when somebody sends out a document for everybody else's review, don't reply all, just reply directly back to the author with your comments and edits. I think you do that for the most part, but it's just a reminder that,
Yeah,
you know, replying all starts to create the
Yeah.
illusion that there's a deliberation going on, committee work's being done via
Right.
email.
exactly.
Right.
So anybody have any comments about this? I know you have sent your comments already, Tom. I think
I think it was a good job. I had some comments, and I'm sure he'll incorporate them as needed.
yeah,
Yeah, I'm good.
Okay.
I've read them both, and I'm good.
okay. I guess then we're waiting for each one of us to draft a little bit on the looking ahead. I know that you, Tom, had mentioned um uh property tax override and possible new areas of revenue. That's something for town council to think about. Or any other, and plus the schools. I mean, I think you made a very good point that we need to do something.
Yeah, and it really goes back to Chris King's point about, and what Mark was also saying, that, the CWMP, as worthy as it is, has sucked up, all of the oxygen in the room.
Yeah.
Correct.
And maybe that's the point that needs to be made. And, from the sound of it, from, what we heard from the superintendent of schools, there are some truly needed capital projects that are being deferred.
Well, there's more.
What happens if the Municipal Empowerment Act passes, which allows communities to implement additional local tax options? And where's that get directed? Maybe
It's a great question
on that. Maybe the council would be interested in hearing where you think that should be directed based on your review here.
What would be permitted under that, Mark?
It allows local meals, adjustments to local meals taxes, rooms taxes, and a surcharge on motor vehicle excise.
And I'm sorry, and the last one was the surcharge on what?
Surcharge on motor vehicle excise.
So I could see that the first two would be very attractive because the argument would be that they would be hitting tourists coming to the Cape. The last one would not be attractive because the people who register their cars here live here.
And
Yeah.
and then also with the tax on the automobiles, doesn't that all right now go towards fixing roads?
Well,
Would
it's
that
all
have to?
general fund revenue. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But the surcharge could go to wherever we want it. Is that right?
Yes. Any new revenue source, we can create a so-called stabilization fund and dedicate it to any purpose that we wanted to, or we could just let it follow the general fund.
Okay.
I think that's a worthwhile point to add in there, Lillian, about, that to start thinking about if the act passes, that some serious thought should be given to that as opposed to an override. Although overrides have their attraction too. I mean, you increase the residential exemption at the same time. What can we go to, 45?
We could go as high as 35%. We're currently at
35.
25.
We're at 25. So
And if we become a seasonal community,
Yeah. There you
if
go.
we receive the designation as a seasonal community, we could go as high as 50%.
right, which I would argue we should become a designated seasonal community.
I think we can throw out all of those possibilities.
Yeah, I really think so. I
Yeah.
mean, you could really see that an override on the property tax would have minimal impact potentially on most of the homeowners who are residents.
Right.
Especially if you made a tweak to the residential exemption, kind of like giving it back to your
Yeah.
value.
Well, that's what I would do. I mean, it's you go from 25 to 35, or maybe to 50 if we could. That would be, you're shifting within categories, but that and quite frankly, there's a good public policy thing to it too, which is that it might encourage people to actually live here year round.
Mhm.
Yeah, it would.
Yeah.
Well, and there's something to be said for that.
Yeah. And Mark made him a good point. Maybe we could divert part of that $5 million from the general fund that we're now giving to CWMP to other capital projects. And so that's, we could talk about that too. Those are some things that really people need to be thinking about.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, Mark, the model for financing the CWMP is such a great model. It is the what if. What if we shortchange CWMP a little bit? What would that do to the model? How could we feel comfortable with the model? And that's all I was trying to say is there a way to feel more comfortable giving more, spreading the commitments around a bit more?
Yeah, as more people are hooked into the sewer and they're paying the rate, then perhaps we can siphon off some of that 5 million to something else.
Or you do a little bit of each.
Yeah.
A little bit of
a tiny bit. Yeah.
changing.
At this point, when you play around with the model, there's not much that could be siphoned off based on what we've committed ourselves to, which is about $300 million in projects, and the loans that are going to be coming on the books in the near future. We're going to need most of that 5.75 million, if not all of it, just to pay the loans back on those projects.
Yeah.
So there's probably not much we can do there. The other thing you may want to put on your list too is what's hanging out there is cannabis tax. We don't have recreational marijuana in town yet. However, there is an item on the agenda next week to expand the overlay district to allow for a medical treatment center, which I believe the revenues that they generate are subject to a 3% tax. And so, there's there's a tax associated with that that will come into the general fund as well if the council were to adopt that. And there, it's not a lot of money, but it's just, it's another revenue source. You look at Sandwich and Mashpee, I think they're taking in about $200,000 a year right now in cannabis taxes. Provincetown over 200,000 a year. I think the market's saturated. If Barnstable were to, allow for recreational marijuana establishments, we probably wouldn't see much more than $200,000 a year in revenue because current recreational users already have a local option to go to, whether they drive to Yarmouth or, Sandwich or Mashpee or Brewster. Brewster has it as well. We have it in Barnstable. We're not going to create more users. I think it's just going to maybe centralize the business a little bit more in Barnstable for the current recreational users. And we'll get an uptick for seasonal visitors who may visit those establishments. But it's another potential revenue source out there that, we may want to keep in the general fund and direct it towards operations.
It is. I'm not as confident in that one. I think everyone thought there'd be so much revenue from marijuana, and it's quite clear that that's not happening. And the pricing at this point with all the taxes is such that, quite frankly, the underground market's a lot cheaper.
Yeah, it's a good point.
Not that I would know.
A friend of yours, but a friend
Well, the other thing they
a
did,
friend tells me.
You probably know this, because you read about this stuff all the time. Is the host community agreements?
Yeah,
the Cannabis Control Commission is pulling those away. Communities were seeing this as almost as a tool to extort these operations with another host community agreement where they get 3% of the revenues that they generate. Well,
Wow.
Cannabis Control Commission took that away, no more, because communities couldn't justify that these establishments were having such an impact on them that they needed that revenue to offset the negative impacts that were occurring. And so they said, no more. You can enter into a host community agreement, but any charge that you want to assess a cannabis facility has to go through them for their review, and you have to provide them justification. And that's cut back a lot on a lot of revenue for communities who are hosting these.
Can I just talk about fixed costs for a second? I'm thinking, as we're trying to generate more revenue or shift revenue from fixed costs back into the municipal and school funds, is there, I'd like to make some discussion around healthcare costs, especially healthcare costs for post-employment healthcare costs. What I'm seeing is I don't understand why the costs are so high if retired individuals can go on to Medicare, Part A and Part B, and even pay for Part C themselves, or is that what we're paying for? Is a supplemental like a Part C?
Yeah, there's a couple pieces to that. Public safety employees like police and fire, they can retire at a much earlier age than 65, and so when they retire, we continue to provide them a legacy plan. At the regular rates for active employees. They're eligible for those, and then when they do reach 65, it is mandatory that everybody go to Medicare. Okay. But there's a MedX plan. There's a supplemental plan that the town contributes half the cost towards to provide for, coverage for those things that Medicare doesn't provide for. And so, yeah, we have an OPEB calculation done every year that takes all of that into consideration with, all the assumptions that actuaries use for life expectancy and so forth. And, we have $100 million unfunded liability associated with healthcare for our active workforce, because they want us paying. We should be banking money for our active workforce as they're working for us and not waiting until they retire. So the theory being, we should have all this money sitting in a trust
Yeah.
So that when they retire, we've got 100% of their healthcare costs into retirement banked. So that taxpayers during their employment time paid for their retirement benefit, and not future taxpayers. It's just like the pension system, the same theory behind pensions and why we had to go to, the only difference being is that they mandated us to start paying for the unfunded liability on pensions, where OPEB, there's no mandate yet. However, we've taken a proactive approach and we've created an annual funding, and you see it in the fixed cost. I think it's about $850,000 that we're putting towards that,
Right.
because we're trying to accumulate assets to address this unfunded liability down the road, and we don't want to keep kicking the can down the road, because if we did nothing, I'm sure we'd get dinged in our bond rating and for that, because we're just burying our heads in the sand when it comes to these unfunded liabilities.
And I understand, I agree with paying insurance after retirement or after leaving the job for like police. After they've gotten to a certain seniority level, they might not work up to 65. Prior to 65, they would stop working. I was thinking that it was more for, I'm going to pick on the schools, but more for teachers. And we're not paying retirement, or we're not paying healthcare for the firemen, or are we?
No, the fire districts do.
Okay.
And teachers actually can go to the group insurance commission. They
Right.
join the state's health insurance plan. But we get assessed back from the state the cost of retired teachers' health insurance every year. That's
Okay.
that $4 million figure that you see in there for retired teachers' health insurance. That comes from the state. They turn around and charge us back for that. So,
Yeah.
yeah, we pay for retired teachers. We pay for retired municipal employees, with the exception of firefighters, who are, fire district's responsibility.
Yeah. And I don't have the history, but it was stated that, fixed costs have typically been about 30% of the total general fund. And then what's left over, the 70%, then gets split up between the two. Then there's the argument of, well, the school gets 70%, but really, or 60%, excuse me, 60%, but really there's a little bit more of that, because there's fixed costs that are incorporated into above the 60% that the school gets.
Right.
So it's a little funky for me to look at it that way, but I understand and I agree.
Can you imagine if look at the school assessments that are in the fixed cost? Okay, charter schools, regional school district, school choice.
Yep.
If we were to add those costs to the school department's operating budget, along with their health insurance, Medicare, life insurance, property and casualty insurance, put all that into the school department budget, we're probably looking closer to an 80-20 split on revenue growth. But since we pull all that out and we put it in the fixed cost because we want to control that,
Right.
it provides more control over those costs. Then that's why we're down to the 60-40, is because a lot of the school related costs is included in the fixed costs.
Yeah. No, understand. Okay. Sorry, again, another question. I just trying to understand.
Did we have an increase of active employees subscribing to the health insurance when we moved it to 70-30?
Yes. Yeah, we had additional participation. But the bigger change than that was that employees moved from less expensive plans like HMOs to more expensive plans like PPOs, because they could get better coverage at less the cost, because our contribution rate went from 50 to 70%. And so we saw employees take advantage of that. And that we can't predict. They can send out surveys to the workforce, but the workforce isn't going to tell us with any real accuracy what they're going to do with their health insurance. So We had to wait and see for open enrollment to see what would happen. And sure enough, we saw migration to more expensive plans because we increased our contribution rate.
That's good to know. We weren't quite sure when we made that shift.
No, we weren't.
Yeah.
And yeah, and how many, there's a number of people who didn't take health insurance through the town, but with the increased contribution, they moved to the town's insurance because it was probably a better, situation for them financially, for their family. Their spouse's health insurance may have been more expensive until we made that shift.
Yeah. Okay then. Um, so if each of you wants to draft something for the looking ahead, send it to me. I'll cobble it all together, and then I'll add the acknowledgments, and that's the end. That's the end. Um, Last year we did for looking ahead, we had CWMP, staffing, which I'll ask Chris Lawson to do. Inflation and interest rates, I'll do that. And we did water. Um, I'll be happy to do water unless somebody else wants to do water. Because that remains a really important component.
What's so important about water? What did you, as in terms of a final looking ahead? You mean you're talking about the water system in Hyannis?
Many, water is the quality of drinking water and mitigating the pollution of the water bodies.
Okay, so that's
Yeah.
okay.
Lillian, since you did it last year, it makes sense you just do it.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean,
Does somebody want to do the CWMP?
Who did that last year?
I did.
Is there
I
much
c-
you would change?
No, not really.
I mean, I can look over what I can give it a shot, and then you can just throw
Yeah,
it all out and
yeah,
rewrite it,
right.
which would be fine by me.
Well, the current sources of revenue, of course, remain the same, but we're expanding the model, so
Right.
that's a new twist.
Right.
And Tom, if you want to take a look at
Yeah, I'll take a look as well.
schools
Chris,
and
why don't you
revenue.
take a look? I'll then take a look and then we'll get those
All
changes.
right.
All right.
Okay. So we are still on for every Wednesday. Do you want to meet next Wednesday and go over fixed costs and the looking ahead? We could actually wrap this up.
That might be possible.
Yeah, I'd like to do that. I'd like to get fixed cost off the table, and a stake in the ground will help me.
Okay, so why don't we plan to meet on the 14th and clean it all up? And Chris is going to put all this together with Tom's help. You don't know this, but he volunteered you to help him do this.
So
Okay.
I'll put it all together, which is fine. But Tom, when I saw your report looks very clean, and I like the way that you've organized some of the outlines, the way that the report looks. So I'm just going to slap it together, and I'll make it look good, and then I'll throw it over to you for a final slap together.
Well, I think what's going to happen is we're going to try next week to have all of the substance in there. I think that's probably
That's-
correct. We
That's
will
correct.
certainly have to do another round of just making it so that the whole thing fits together, has a common look and feel.
Exactly.
right.
Yeah.
That's
Lillian,
what.
and Mark, let me ask you a question. Next week's CFAC meeting on Monday has and only one substantive agenda item, which is a report from us. Is this going to be a 2-minute meeting? We'll say, well,
Yeah,
Yeah,
really.
I probably like the last meeting. It's probably going to be very quick. So I don't think Hector wanted to dive into the CWMP funding model until after we got through this process.
right.
Right.
And Lily, the other thing is that when we met last, I guess we said that we had no chair of this subcommittee, but I think that we should formally acknowledge that you're the chair and you can speak on our behalf.
Who is this now?
You,
If you like, if you feel we need one, but
I feel, I feel
think
we need a
I-
designated spokesperson. And since you're the one who's pushing along even this meeting, so
well,
I think we
I'd
should.
be happy to be the titular chair, but really, I think this committee has been just so productive. Each member has just gone right in there and done their work. So there was no, we have actually had subcommittees where the chair has had to do the work of other members of the subcommittee. So this has been a really easy, productive, cooperative subcommittee.
Okay.
I have enjoyed it.
All right.
Uh,
So we
you're-
meet next Wednesday and we will
Next
have a
Wednesday.
quick meeting on Monday.
Yeah. So we'll have the 2-minute meeting on Monday.
I think so.
Okay. Well, is there any other business to come before us?
Nothing
Just-
on my part.
Just send me whatever you've got and then we can discuss it next Wednesday.
That's
Great.
good.
Should be able to wrap it up. And then send it on to you two guys to make it look good.
All right.
Yes.
Great. Thanks so much.
Take care. All have a good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night,
Safe-
everyone.